All right, thank you for joining me. This is English lesson number 10 for A2C Junior English. This is Mr. Brewer, and we're going to get started. This lesson is for Monday and Tuesday, the week of September 28th. We do not have class on Friday, so this will be a one lesson week. This lesson will be a little bit beefier than normal lessons because it is the only lesson for this week, and we'll have a little bit of space to work on makeup work on Thursday because we do not have class on Friday. The old assignments at this point are the Padlet discussion on the Buckley-Baldwin debate, the A2C form, standard assignment number 1, standard assignment number 2, and Gatsby chapter number 1. Chapter 2 in the Great Gatsby was a single question, and it was extra credit. Your assignment for this week, the only assignment due at the end of this week, is your Gatsby chapter 3 reading response, and that is finding 3 examples of figurative language in chapter 3. That will be due by Saturday the 3rd this week. Due next Saturday is the larger standards assignment number 3, which is your outline for your This I Believe essay. Our learning targets for this week. We will be reading chapter 3 in the Great Gatsby for our literature target, and we will find 3 examples of figurative language of that chapter. This means we can read an at-level text and respond to the higher order questions about themes and finding those figurative language, pulling those out of the text itself, and that is a graded assignment. For our informational target, we're going to listen to excerpts from the show Firing Line that William Buckley ran. We're going to experience different viewpoints on a common issue and explore foundational text in a topic that is relevant. We're going to talk about the foundational thinking behind the Black Lives Matter movement and the modern conservative movement. For our writing learning target, we're going to write an outline and begin pre-writing our first A2C essay, and that is our This I Believe essay. And our miscellaneous target is still reviewing previously assigned informational assignments and completing work that we may have missed, because we're doing NTI right now, and it's always good to try and go back and knock out stuff that we may have gotten away from us. Real quick, our week structure is Monday, Tuesday lesson. My office hours are 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. on Wednesdays. I'll be posting that link in Google Classroom every Wednesday before 10 a.m. And on Thursday and Friday, normally we'll have a second lesson, but this week we're just doing this one lesson because it's a little bit beefier and we have a little bit more to cover. So mindfulness. It's a nice, chill city. Just relaxing. And floating cat god. All right, moving on. Our third writing lesson is on the outline of our This I Believe essay. The format for this outline is posted in Google Classroom. I have gone through it in some detail in a previous assignment, so I'm not going to go through it in as much detail in this one. The 3 This I Believe essays that will be posted alongside this recording are here. The first one that we'll listen to in live class is Margaret Chase Smith's Finding Security and Fundamental Freedoms. The second one is Yvette Doss's Finding Equality Through Logic. And the third one is Dan Tanney's An Optimistic View of the World. So those are the 3 This I Believe essays we will listen to in class. If you haven't found your topic yet, this is the week to do that because you will need to have your outline done by the end of next week. You should contemplate these questions. If you're stuck on finding your topic, I would recommend pausing this and reading through each one of these. If you haven't come up with a topic yet, this should help you narrow it down. I won't read them all. All right, and if you go to Google Classroom, standards assignment number 3 is your outline for your essay. It looks like this. So what I would like you to do is create a topic statement, a belief statement with 3 supporting parts. So my belief statement for this pretty basic This I Believe essay is, I believe that I never really knew how to cook until I left home and had kids. And then I support that with 3 statements. I was always eating fast food. My mom cooked most of our meals at home, and I really only cooked at work when I was a caterer, and then it was always for a bunch of other people. And I'd like you to also include an anecdote or a vignette, which just means a short story about your topic that kind of draws in your reader. Mine would probably be about learning how to cook. I learned how to cook with a dude who survived a genocide over in Europe, and we made a bunch of sandwiches, and he talked about surviving that genocide, and we had a whole bunch of really crazy and interesting conversations while making a whole bunch of sandwiches and minimum wage. It was a really interesting 4.5 years at IUS, making all those sandwiches for catering and other catering food. It was an interesting dude, and I would probably write about that to kind of elevate my sort of boring topic into something that people would want to read. Yeah, so you give me your vignette, and then underneath your vignette, all you need to do is repost the 3 different parts of your topic, and then you're good. The literature lesson for this week is based in The Great Gatsby, Chapter 3. Your assignment for this week is to read the 3rd chapter in The Great Gatsby and then find 3 examples of figurative language. And I'm going to give you some examples of figurative language to use to kind of focus your writing in just a second. All right, so our assignment is to use 3 examples from Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby using one of these, using 3 of these figurative language definitions. We're going to look at metaphors, similes, personification, metonymy and synecdoche, which may be new, and hyperbole or litotes. You've probably heard of metaphors at this point in your educational journey. It's a description of 2 separate objects without using like or as. For example, the man's heart was a frail and twisted twig. Now, it wasn't like a twisted twig, it was a twisted twig. A couple more examples. Her temper was a ferocious lion inside. His art was an oasis from the pain. Literally was. Their footsteps were tiny pattering raindrops. The roses were little bits of heaven. So we're not just comparing 2 things, we're comparing them directly. To similes, which is a description of 2 separate objects using like or as. A wiener dog is like a hot dog. She was furious like a swarm of hornets. His painting was like a forgotten story. Their footsteps echoed like blueberries hitting the bottom of a metal pail. The roses were as creamy and pink as a glass of strawberry milk. So simile uses those like or as words. That's kind of the giveaway for similes, and metaphors are direct comparison. Personification is a group of words that gives living qualities to non-living things, like the wind was blowing ferociously. The wind can't be ferocious because ferocious implies an emotional state. The wind can blow, intensely, but it can't blow ferociously as like a lion would roar ferociously. All right, so here's some examples of personification. My bed is calling my name. Your bed can't literally call unless you're living on some kind of like horrifying living bed frame. This painting spoke to me. Again, paintings probably aren't speaking to you unless like you're on some powerful mushrooms. The wind whispered faintly. The wind may sound faint, but it's not literally whispering. The homework glared at them from across the room. Again, hopefully your homework doesn't actually literally have eyes. It may figuratively, but it shouldn't literally have eyes. So metonymy and synecdoche, these are a form of figurative language that is representative language. So it's filler words that replaces other words. So metonymy is a figure of speech that replaces the name of a thing with the name of something else with which it is closely associated. Synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase that refers to a part, that's the giveaway for synecdoche, a part of something is substituted for the whole. Not very good at drawing with this. Yeah, so metonymy is where a related thing is replacing a word. Synecdoche is where a part of something is replacing a word. Here's some examples. So for metonymy, you're using something related. England decides to keep checks on immigration. So England is the government. The pen is mightier than the sword. So the pen refers to written words, the idea of written words, and the sword refers to the idea of military force. The Oval Office was busy in work. The Oval Office stands for the people who work in the office, or maybe the president. Synecdoche is different. They're similar enough to be confused for each other a lot, but synecdoche is where you're using specifically a part of a thing. So it's not just a related idea, but a part of an object. Boots on the ground refers to soldiers because the soldiers wear the boots. New wheels refers to a car because the wheels are on the car. Ask for her hand means to ask to marry a woman because she is attached to her hand. Suits can refer to business people because business people wear suits. See, this one, at that point, I feel like hands, yeah, you're connected. Wheels, yeah, you're connected. Boots, okay, yeah, they're wearing boots. Suits, I guess business people can wear suits. Plastic can refer to credit cards. Lend me your ears is the attention of a listener because your ears are attached to you. All hands on deck is because the hands are literally attached to the sailors. So it's that close attachment to something physically, generally, that makes something a synecdoche. I feel like plastic for credit cards is like on the line between synecdoche and metonymy. They're pretty difficult. You'll probably see them on the ACT. We'll bring them up as we go on through the year and point them out. So your assignment is to find 3 of these. There's also hyperbole, which is an exaggerated statement, like the ice cream cone I ate was a mile high. Here are some examples. I could eat a horse. You probably couldn't literally eat a horse. I was so surprised I nearly died. So like I was so surprised I nearly died. You probably didn't nearly die because you were surprised. He kept talking and talking for 1,000 years. Again, probably untrue, unless it is just probably untrue. Unless you're in like a Dormammu Doctor Strange situation. Litotes is the negation of one quality to emphasize its opposite. Again, this is maybe a term like synecdoche or metonymy that you haven't seen before. So, for example, like, I had the best day ever after a car crash. You're being sarcastic. A lot of sarcasm is litotes. He's not the friendliest person, meaning he sucks. It wasn't a terrible trip, meaning it was a pretty bad trip. She's no spring chicken, meaning she's old, or it's not exactly a walk in the park, meaning it's really hard. It wasn't the worst grade on the test. It was a pretty bad grade. A lot of sarcasm is litotes. Nick, the narrator in The Great Gatsby, uses sarcasm a lot, but his is very dry. So if you catch Nick's sarcasm and you use it in your assignment, then good on you. All right, so Gatsby Chapter 3 assignment is posted in Google Classroom. There are examples for each of these that are different from the ones I gave in this lesson attached to that assignment, as well as a hyperlink on each one of the types of figurative speech that I'm asking you to look for so that you can kind of double check what you're about to post in there is in fact the figure of speech you're defending it to be. And that is the only graded assignment for this week. We're going to move on to our informational texts. All right, so our informational texts today are excerpts from Firing Line, which is the show that William Buckley ran for many years. So we're going to be looking at the show. The show ran from the late 50s on through I think into the 80s. So why are we watching this old show, Mr. Burr? Like for real now, what do we have to gain from watching Firing Line with William Buckley? Well, we've watched a lot of James Baldwin in the past couple weeks, and now we're going to dig a little bit into the guy that he was debating at the beginning of our class when we watched the Baldwin-Buckley debate. So William Buckley is one of the founders of the modern American Conservative Party, also known as the Republican Party or the GOP. He's credited with much of the rhetoric, meaning the language and arguments that the modern GOP uses when campaigning and arguing against liberalism, socialism, or Marxist influence in the U.S. As a country that has a two-party system, it is worth noting today how Buckley responded to the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s as a precursor to how the modern conservative response to the civil rights movement found in the Black Lives Matter movement. The first clip we're going to watch is a clip with William Buckley interviewing Reverend Jesse Jackson, and it is on the failure of the American society. And I'm going to drop that link in this video below, and we're watching from 1820 to 2702. The second clip that we're going to watch is the interview between Buckley and Floyd McKissick, and is on the war in Vietnam, civil rights movement, and American symbols. And this is the one that we're going to reference a little bit more directly as we go through the second part of this informational lesson. And we'll be referencing this one a little bit more because if you want to understand the fundamental difference between American conservatism and American liberalism, you really need to listen to the way that Buckley defends the Statue of Liberty in this context, because it gives you a hint as to where Buckley's conservatism comes from philosophically, which kind of brings us into this next space, which is going to get really deep really fast. We need to go back to the School of Athens for a second to talk about the difference between Buckley and Baldwin's America. So in Athens, there's this dude named Plato. You may have heard of him. For Plato, so Plato creates this concept called Platonic forms. And for Plato, the forms, and we are talking about philosophy now, so bear with me. If you can follow this conversation, though, you can kind of get into the root of the difference between conservatism and liberalism in America today. So if you can follow along, this is kind of like where they're both coming from at their root and why they don't get along. So for Plato, the forms are perfect exemplars or ideal types of the properties and kinds that are found in the world. So corresponding to every such property or idea is a form that is a perfect exemplar or ideal. So for Plato, ideas are pure and perfect, and all reality comes from these perfect forms of ideas, capital F, these perfect forms. Platonic forms then create a world where the symbol of the Statue of Liberty is worth defending as much, if not more, than the reality of McKissick's experienced struggle. So when Buckley and McKissick are going back and forth on the Statue of Liberty, and McKissick is quoted for his famous quote where he says that, if you really wanted to do something meaningful, you should break the Statue of Liberty's legs and point her towards Mississippi, because that would be a more accurate depiction of McKissick's experience of liberty in the United States. Buckley gets really upset because the ideal, the pure, the symbol of the Statue of Liberty, which for Buckley he defends as a conservative, he's defending the ideal truth. So Plato is an idealist and believes that truth comes from ideas. Versus Aristotle. Notice the lowercase f in Aristotelian forms. So Aristotle rejected Plato's idea of forms, but not the notion of form itself. So for Aristotle, forms do not exist independently of things, meaning every form is the form of some thing, like some real thing. A substantial form is a kind that is attributed to a thing, without which that thing would be a different kind or would cease to exist altogether. All right, that gets a little bit in the weeds of the philosophy, so let's get back out of the weeds a little bit. So through observation, Plato argued, and analysis, in combination with logic, we can make true statements about the natural world and understand the nature of essences, what a thing is, and the nature of causes, why a thing is. So different from Plato's idealism, which believes that truth follows concepts, Aristotle argued that truth comes from observation and analysis of observed experience. So Plato argues truth is ideas, and the world is imperfect expression of the pure, perfect ideas. So the ideas are perfect, the world is an imperfect expression of perfect ideas, and whenever we should all be doing our best to pursue the perfect ideals that we can hold, these perfect concepts that we can hold in our mind. Aristotle comes back and argues, no, the experienced world is full of these forms that we can observe, and we can arrive at truth through the forms. So Aristotle argues experience, Plato argues ideal. All right, so what do these dead Greeks have to do with Black Lives Matter, Breonna Taylor, and James Baldwin versus William Buckley? I would argue everything, because right now we're in a pitched combat between Platonic idealism and Aristotelian experiential reality. And here's how. So the reason Baldwin and Buckley talk past each other is because they're coming from Platonic versus Aristotelian standpoints. Now, bear with me, okay? Buckley argues in the debate we began the year with that the Platonic form of America is worth preserving. He argues that the form of the law in America is more important than the experiences that Baldwin shares. And he says much of the same thing to McKissick when he says that the horrors of your experience aren't worth more to me than the reality of the Statue of Liberty, or the symbol of the Statue of Liberty. Baldwin argues that his experiences and observed evidence of racism and systemic violence in America is more important than the existing structures in America that allow for racism to flourish, and thus the country needs new laws to counter and respond to the history of oppression in the U.S. Both men feel justified in their position and argue passionately in the debate. The reason they cannot arrive at any meaningful agreement is the root of their arguments do not allow for agreement. The two realities of Platonic forms and Aristotelian experiential forms are incompatible, and without understanding that philosophy just a little bit, it can be confusing as to how today we can still have this debate. All right, so where does the debate stand today? In the U.S. today, the Black Lives Matter movement makes much the same argument as James Baldwin has been making throughout the first couple weeks of this class. They make the argument that Black experience in the United States from its inception, as we explored in the New Jim Crow and in the interviews with Baldwin and about Baldwin, is the experience of oppression through systemic racism, through mass incarceration, through Jim Crow laws, and through slavery originally, and also the intentionally designed denial of wealth. And that is the Aristotelian experienced form of America as it is lived in the U.S. today. The conservative counter-argument to Black Lives Matter deeply mirrors the language of Buckley, arguing that being anti-classist is a form of Marxism or communism, and that Black Lives Matter is un-American, which is very similar to Buckley's response to McKissick when he talks about the Statue of Liberty. And it's defending the Platonic symbols that represent American ideals. So it's defending symbolism and idealism. And when the presidential debate airs on Tuesday night, look for some of the same dichotomy or division in the language of President Trump and Joe Biden. One party is defending an ideal image of what America can be, and one party is expressing the experience of America that is. So you have the Platonic concept of make America great again, hearkening back to some perfect moment in the past, some ideal form of America that we want to in some way regain or recapture, versus the experience of an America that is deeply problematic and is rooted in systemic racism and needs to be changed, and that is the liberal argument. So you have Platonic form and idealism versus Aristotelian form and lived experience. So look for that on Tuesday. All right, that's the end of our informational lesson. It's a little bit short in this recorded version because I'm going to be dropping those links to those videos underneath the recorded version for you to watch on your own, because I have not yet figured out how to embed videos in PowerPoint. Once again, the assignment for this week is your Google Classroom assignment for Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby. Thank you guys for listening along, and I hope you have a good afternoon, or evening, or morning, or whenever you're watching this. Bye.